This is Dimitri Lascaris for The Real News. On Tuesday of this week, the Canadian province of British Columbia held an election, and the result was a nail-biter. BC's legislature consists of 87 seats, and in order to command a majority, a party must hold a minimum of 44 seats. The provisional results are that the right-wing incumbent Liberal Party, led by BC Premier Christy Clark, won 43 seats. The Social Democratic NDP won 41 seats, and the BC Green Party, led by climate scientist Andrew Weaver, won 3 seats. This means that no party commands a majority, and that with about 4% of the seats, the BC Greens have an extraordinary opportunity to determine whether the Liberals will continue to govern British Columbia or whether they will be supplanted by the NDP. However, as I mentioned, these results are not final. In particular, in the riding of Courtney Comox, the NDP candidate leads the Liberal candidate by a mere 9 votes, and absentee ballots have yet to be counted. There's a Canadian military base in that riding, which means that the number of absentee ballots could easily be sufficient to change the preliminary outcome in that riding. The Liberals won the riding of Courtney Comox in the prior election. So all that stands in the way of another Liberal majority is a mere 9 votes. When the final count is done, the people of BC could be faced with another Liberal majority, even though over 55% of voters selected a more progressive alternative than the Liberals. But even if the current results stand, there's a good chance, depending upon how the BC Green Party deals with the hand that it's been dealt, that the Liberals will remain in government and be the dominant force within the BC government. Now here to discuss all of this with us, and particularly the role that energy issues played in this election campaign, is Michael Hudson. Michael Hudson is a distinguished research professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He's the author of many books, including The Bubble and Beyond and Finance, Capitalism and Its Discontents, Killing the Host, How Financial Parasites and Debt Destroy the Global Economy. And most recently, J is for Junk Economics, a survivor's guide to economic vocabulary in an age of deception. Thanks for joining us today, Michael.
It's good to be here. You mentioned the absentee ballots, and of course, that's going to sway the election. In the past election, the NDP got most of the absentee ballots, not only of the 176,000 absentees, but you mentioned the military base, and that's 6,600 ballots, and that also went for the NDP, fortunately, in the last election. So the NDP looks like at least it will have the 42 seats. The problem is the role of the provinces generally in Canada. The voting was very largely about energy, not only the Kinder Morgan pipeline, but the dam, the Site C dam, that is already begun for $12 billion in Vancouver. But none of this is going to generate money for the province itself. The province of Vancouver, like other Canadian provinces, are pretty much looted by the federal government. That is, as you said, the Liberal Party is very right-wing. Justin Trudeau's father was Tony Blair before there was a Tony Blair, and the present Justin Trudeau is sort of a cross between Tony Blair and Hillary Clinton, but a little bit more to the right. He's appointed a ultra right-wing Ukrainian nationalist whose grandfather was a Gau leader, killing the Ukrainian Jews, and who was supporting.
That's Chrystia Freeland. You're referring to the foreign minister, I take it.
Yes, foreign minister, Chrystia Freeland. Extremely right-wing. So certainly in the past, people have called Canada's prime minister a puppet of the Americans, but certainly Trudeau is not Trump's puppet. If anything, he's Hillary's puppet. And the way that Vancouver's been in the news for the last month hasn't been about the election so much as Trump's levy of a softwood tariff on Canada, saying that Canada has an unfair advantage against American softwood producers. And its advantage is the degree of total corruption that you have in the giveaway of natural resources to Canada. I'm told that they've given it to the forestry for cutting down Vancouver's forests. They have to spend.
You mentioned Vancouver. I think you're referring to British Columbia.
Yeah. British Columbia's forests are only a half cent per, I think it's acre or something like that. It's so trivial that Trump is absolutely correct in saying that the degree of corruption in Canada, in the federal party, and in the giveaway of wood gives Canada an advantage over American softwoods. And so the retaliation threatened by Prime Minister Trudeau is to block American exports of thermal coal through Vancouver and shipping. So it all comes down to shipping. And the energy question is also very largely an issue of shipping. The Kinder Morgan pipeline, which was the major issue in this election, is going to involve an enormous amount of ships, of tanker ships, going between Vancouver Island and the mainland of Vancouver. There's something like 36 ships per month. Then you can imagine what that is on a yearly basis, and the chance of oil spills, not only in the pipeline, but by the shipping, is very high. So,
and as I understand it, shipping volume is expected to increase to something in the range of 400 tankers per year, so almost a sevenfold increase if the Kinder Morgan expansion actually goes through.
That's right. And most of the dam that's being built for $13 million, I was told up there by the former premier of British Columbia, they said it would create jobs. He looked at the calculations. It will create 7 janitor jobs in British Columbia. So that's the helping British Columbian labor that they're supposed to be. So the NDP was pretty pessimistic before the election because the politics in Canada are really pretty backward, and you know that they're backward when they're voting essentially against their self-interest to give away the natural resources to other provinces and to essentially the pipeline companies, the finance companies, and the high energy companies. So the question is, here's a party with 3 votes. The Green Party are supposed to be holding the balance of power, and you'd think the Green Party's platform that they go to the people in seems to be the same platform in terms of the environment as the NDP, except the Liberals are saying, wait a minute, if you vote for us, the anti-environment party, we will classify you, the Greens, as a national party, and you'll get a huge amount of funding. We can really give you a lot of money if you vote for us. Who are you going to vote for? Money or your ideals? Well, being Canadians, they're probably going to vote for the money. And the whole history of Canada is essentially making money by emptying out the earth and creating holes in the ground and getting rich on it, and then going on to the next hole in the ground or forest to be carved down. So it's really, if there's any province in Canada that has a natural resource curse, it's British Columbia. And the fact that the dam's power is going to be really to fund anti-environmental causes, the pipeline, but also sent to Alberta for the tar sands to help them at a concessionary fee that is not going to be able to yield much to Vancouver at all, given the way that Canadian politics are structured, means that Vancouver people have been almost as screwed in natural resources as they've been screwed in the real estate boom that they've had. In the last 10 years, the real estate prices have tripled in Vancouver, and there's not a single house in Vancouver. They drove me around a month ago that sells for less than $1 million. So you can imagine if you're in Vancouver and you have to work at a real job, you have to borrow enough money from the bank to carry the mortgage on a $1 million house. The Vancouverites are being forced out of their own city to the suburbs. And so the city is now saying, well, let's build public transportation, but the transportation is to be funded by a tax on consumers and an income tax on workers instead of on the real estate developers that are going to end up the beneficiaries. So the Vancouver is being screwed in natural resources, screwed in the real estate. It's not able to get a tax revenue from either the real estate or from the dam and the electric power or from the pipeline. All of the risks are being put onto the population there. And that's why there was such a turnout in the election. And that's why there were so many absentee ballots in this by people who are concerned. And the probability is if so many people are concerned, it must be because of the environment. And probably the expectation I'm told today by political observers, mainly in the NDP, who are in Toronto for a meeting now, are saying that they expect at least for them to come out with a the firm control of the 42 seats they have. The problem is that in Canada, in the province, one of the parliamentarians is a speaker who doesn't have a vote except to break a tie. So they may very well be willing to appoint a Green party as Speaker of the Parliament there, which will take one of its votes away and have sort of a divided Parliament. We won't know really until I think May 28th.
I'd just like to go back a little bit to environmental policy. Certainly, the NDP and the Greens, their platform position on Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion is essentially the same. They oppose it, although there's a really interesting question of what they, as a provincial government, can do to stop it, given Justin Trudeau's approval of the project. But putting that aside, there do seem to be significant differences in terms of their receptivity to the fracking industry. And also, the NDP undertook, as I understand it, to subject the Site C dam to a much more intensive level of scrutiny, but hasn't committed to stopping the project from going forward, whereas the Greens seem to be committed to that. But one thing is for sure, the two platforms of the NDP and the Greens seem to be much more closely aligned than the Green platform is to the Liberal platform. And one would think that from the grassroots of the party, at least, there is going to be, and I've seen indications of this myself, significant pressure on Andrew Weaver, the leader of the Green Party, to do a deal with the NDP. If he doesn't do that deal, what do you think the implications are going to be for, and he ends up going down the road of cooperating with the Liberal government in some form, what do you think the implications are going to be for the Green Party in British Columbia and nationally in Canada?
This situation has occurred in British Columbia in the past, and usually if a third party joins a majority government, and then the Liberals double cross everything that the third party has done to make its political deal, in this case for the money, that third party is absolutely crushed in future elections. And people think, okay, we understand that you only have a public relations talk, a patter talk for the ideals, and you're really in it for the money. And if the Greens back the Liberals in this, then this finishes them off. They will lose all credibility in British Columbia.
There's also a precedent for this in the United Kingdom, obviously a different culture, different system to some degree, but nonetheless, the Liberal Democrats there were eviscerated after their close relationship in Parliament with the Conservatives. So there's some precedent for this outside of the country in another parliament.
Before. And that's the position the Greens are in today.
Right. And so I just want to close by focusing a little bit on the hydroelectric industry and this whole issue of IPPs, independent power producers, and how that's affected BC Hydro, which is in a very difficult financial position. What can you tell us about that and what the party's positions are with respect to these independent power producers, which are really private power producers that have got major contracts with BC Hydro that have had a devastating impact on its finances?
Well, behind the power producers are the banks. And you're right, energy really means finance because there's a symbiosis between the banks and the bondholders and the energy industry. The bondholders and the banks want whatever is very expensive, and nothing is more expensive than a $12 billion dam or a big hydro project there. The ideal of the banks and the hydro project is not to give anything at all to the government. And in this case, the government means British Columbia. So almost any hydro project or energy project in Canada is going to screw the domestic province that it's in. A fight has been going on, and I think 40 years ago, when I was a financial advisor to the Canadian government, there was talk of the Western provinces actually withdrawing from Canada because the whole of Canada is really being run by Ontario, and Ontario's being run by the banks. All this was taking place in World War II when you had the World War II industrialization, and really the Canadian politics centered on Ontario running the federal government that deprives the provinces of really much say at all in their environmental laws or their tax laws or what they're doing. Canada is a mal-structured, you'd almost call it a failed economy, except its natural resources are so rich that everybody can get wealthy off making holes in the ground and digging up the oil and polluting the environment. The worst thing about the tar sands, by the way, energy is all about water there. Not only the water for the dam, but it takes 10 gallons of water to make every gallon of oil from the tar sands. And the water is being given to the tar sands for nothing, just like the water in the dam is counted as nothing. And so all of this is just like the forests are being given away and the natural resources of Canada are given away for nothing. They're all counted at a zero cost in all of the equations that are done. And the reason they do that is to leave all the money to pay interest to the banks for advancing the money to build the dams and build this very expensive energy, which is not needed at all by British Columbia. It's all for the pipeline and for the tar sands and for other provinces.
Right. Well, I guess in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to find out just how happy the Canadian banks are going to be when the final results come in for this election. I hope Michael will have an opportunity at that point to revisit the lay of the land and talk about the future of British Columbia.
We'll see what compromises are made.
Thank you very much for joining us. And this is Dimitri Lascaris for The Real News.